John sat at the kitchen table, the acceptance letter from Westerfield College lying in front of him like a portal to another universe. The small but elegant college crest at the top of the page felt heavy with promise. His fingers traced the embossed gold ink. He read the words again, "Congratulations, you have been accepted," and felt a mix of pride and terror twist in his gut. His mother was already at the stove, a hand clamped over her mouth to stifle her sobs of joy. The pot on the stove hissed and steamed as she stirred the contents mindlessly. "I knew you'd get in," she said, voice thick with emotion. "I just knew it." His father, a tall man with a sturdy frame, looked up from his work boots, a wide grin spreading across his face. "That's my boy," he roared, standing up and giving John a hearty slap on the back. "We're going to have to celebrate this. No getting out of it." John smiled, feeling the weight of his parents' expectations bear down on him like a massive, invisible force. His future was changing, reshaping right before his eyes. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. "Can we get pizza?" Sarah piped up, peering over John's shoulder at the letter, her eyes wide with excitement. At 12, she was already taller than most kids her age, her long brown hair hanging in a braid over one shoulder. She'd been more excited about John going to college than anyone else, constantly reminding him of the freedom and fun that awaited him. To her, college was an endless playground of possibilities. "Pizza, absolutely," his father agreed. "And you know what, John? I heard a new store just opened up over on Baker Street. Some fancy furniture place. Might be worth checking out. You'll need to get some things for your dorm room. No more using that old folding chair of yours." John nodded. It all felt so sudden: college, furniture, shopping, planning for a life that wasn't tethered to his small, familiar town. His old life seemed to stretch out behind him like a worn path, comforting but confining. The idea of new things, a new environment, was starting to feel like a promise. A new chair, a desk, maybe even a bookshelf, a space that was his own. His mother finally managed to dry her eyes and walked over, her smile a blend of pride and love. She touched his shoulder gently. "We're so proud of you, John," she said. "You know that, right?" "Yeah, I know, Mom," John replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks." She nodded, pulling him into a hug. For a moment everything felt perfect: his mother's embrace, the scent of dinner cooking, the warmth of his family around him. It was the beginning of something new, and for now that was enough. The day was bright, the sky a wash of pale blue that seemed to stretch out forever. It was the kind of day that made people feel optimistic about the future, and John felt it seeping into his bones as he climbed into the family car. His mother sat in the front passenger seat, a map open in her lap, although she'd already programmed the GPS. His father slid into the driver's seat, whistling a tune that John vaguely recognized from some oldies radio station. Sarah bounced into the back seat beside John, already chattering about the new Ikea store they were heading to. John wasn't sure how he felt about Ikea. He'd heard stories about its endless aisles, its flat-packed furniture that promised the world but delivered sore thumbs and cryptic instructions. But his father seemed excited, and Sarah's enthusiasm was contagious. Even his mother, usually so practical and no-nonsense, seemed curious about the new addition to their town's landscape. As they drove, the new Ikea rose on the horizon like a beacon of consumerism. Its massive blue and yellow sign gleamed in the sunlight, promising affordable furniture and a labyrinthine shopping experience. The parking lot was already half full, a sea of cars that stretched as far as the eye could see. "This place is huge," Sarah breathed, pressing her face against the car window. "I bet we could get lost in there." John snorted. "Yeah, probably. That's the point, right? Keep you wandering around until you filled your cart with everything you didn't know you needed." His father laughed, pulling into a parking space. "That's the spirit, son. Just think of it as an adventure. Who knows what treasures we'll find?" His mother shook her head, smiling. Let's just hope we don't spend all day in there. We've still got a lot of things to do before John leaves for college. They got out of the car, the heat of the day pressing down on them like a living thing. The entrance to Ikea loomed before them, wide glass doors reflecting the sunlight. As they approached, the doors slid open with a soft hiss, welcoming them into the cool, air-conditioned interior. Inside the store was a maze of bright lights and carefully curated displays. Rows of sofas, tables, and chairs stretched out in every direction, punctuated by potted plants and the occasional whimsical piece of decor. Signs hung from the ceiling, directing shoppers to different sections: living room, bedroom, kitchen, storage. "Wow," Sarah whispered, eyes wide. "It's like a whole world in here." John had to admit, it was impressive. The sheer scale of the place was overwhelming, a testament to modern consumerism. He could see why people joked about getting lost in Ikea. It was like a city, a self-contained universe of furniture and home goods. "All right," his father said, clapping his hands together. "Let's split up and see what we can find. John, you're looking for stuff for your dorm room, right? Bed, chair, maybe a desk?" John nodded, feeling a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. This was it, the first step towards his new life. A new bed, a new desk, a chair that wasn't a flimsy folding contraption. It all seemed so simple, but it represented something so much more. "Yeah," he said. "Let's see what they've got." They moved deeper into the store, the hum of voices and the soft strains of background music filling the air. The aisle stretched out before them, a promise of endless possibilities. As they wandered, John felt a sense of anticipation building in his chest. This was the start of something new, something big, and he was ready for it. The store's interior stretched out like a map of the infinite, each section bleeding into the next in a seamless, overwhelming flow of furniture and home decor. John found himself wandering past sleek couches and minimalist coffee tables, his eyes skimming over the price tags without really seeing them. Sarah was ahead, darting from one display to another, her excitement a bright beacon in the controlled chaos of Ikea. John's mother was inspecting a bookshelf, running her fingers along the smooth, polished wood. "We should get this for the living room," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. It would fit perfectly in that empty corner. "Mom," John said, a hint of impatience in his voice. "We're supposed to be looking for stuff for the dorm." She waved a hand dismissively. I know. I just got distracted. It's easy to do in here. It's like they know exactly how to make you want everything." Speaking of distraction, his father cut in, glancing around. "I think I left my phone in the car. You guys start without me, I'll be right back." John's mother frowned, her brows knitting together in concern. "Are you sure? We can wait." His father shrugged, already turning back toward the entrance. "It'll only take a minute. Just keep an eye on Sarah. Okay." John watched his father walk away, his tall figure quickly swallowed up by the flow of shoppers. His mother turned back to the bookshelf, seemingly satisfied. John kept an eye on Sarah, who was now examining a display of brightly colored rugs. And then something strange happened. The lights overhead flickered, just for a second, but enough to make John look up. He glanced toward the entrance, expecting to see his father's familiar figure coming back through the doors. But instead, he saw the glass doors sliding shut. Not slowly, but with a firm, almost final click. His mother must have noticed too, because she turned, a puzzled expression on her face. Did they just close the doors? John frowned, walking towards the entrance. The automatic doors were indeed closed, a solid barrier of glass that suddenly seemed much more imposing. He pushed against them, expecting them to slide open, but they stayed stubbornly shut. "That's weird," he muttered, more to himself than to his mother. "Maybe they're doing some kind of maintenance or something." "John," his mother said, her voice a thin thread of unease. "I think your father just went out there. Try opening it again." John pushed harder, but the doors didn't budge. He felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. He looked around, trying to spot a store employee who could help, but all he saw were the endless rows of furniture and milling shoppers. Then, at the far end of the aisle, he saw a man in a blue Ikea uniform. Relief washed over him. "Hey," John called, waving his hand. "Can you help us with the door?" The man turned, and John felt the words die in his throat. The employee's face was a blank slate, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin. The man tilted his head slightly, as if trying to understand John's request. "What the hell?" John whispered, stumbling back a step. His mother saw it too. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. She grabbed John's arm, pulling him away from the doors. "This has to be some kind of joke," she said, her voice trembling. "A prank, right? This can't be real." But John couldn't take his eyes off the faceless man. The employee turned away, moving with a strange, jerky motion that seemed at odds with the calm, sterile environment of the store. John scanned the aisle, suddenly noticing more employees, each with the same faceless visage. They were everywhere, milling about, going through the motions of work, as if they didn't realize how terrifying they were. "Mom," John said, his voice shaky, "we need to find Dad. Now." His mother nodded, her eyes wide with fear. They turned, grabbing Sarah, who was still blissfully unaware of the growing horror around her. John's father was out there somewhere, beyond those doors, but the doors wouldn't open, and the employees were faceless. It was like they had stepped into another world, a parallel universe where reality twisted just enough to make everything wrong. John felt his heart racing, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't just a shopping trip. This was something else entirely. Something they weren't prepared for. The overhead lights dimmed, their fluorescent hum fading into an unsettling quiet. John's eyes darted around the vast expanse of Ikea, the store now transformed into a shadowed maze of silhouettes and shadows. The ceiling seemed farther away, the aisles longer, stretching into a darkness that felt alive. Sarah clung to their mother, her usual bravado replaced by a tremor of fear. The soft background music that had been playing earlier had vanished, replaced by a deep, echoing silence. "Why are they turning off the lights?" Sarah's voice was small, a tiny thread of sound in the cavernous space. John's mother shook her head, her face pale in the dim light. "I don't know, sweetheart. Just stay close. We'll find your father and get out of here." But John knew the doors were still shut. He'd tried them himself again, just minutes ago, and they hadn't budged. They were trapped inside, and now the lights were going out. His skin prickled with unease, a deep, primal instinct telling him that they were in danger. A low, distant sound broke the silence, a strange, guttural howl that sent a shiver down John's spine. It was joined by another, then another, a chorus of animalistic cries that echoed through the store. John turned, scanning the darkness, trying to locate the source of the noise. The faceless employees were still there, but now they moved with a purpose, their motions quick and erratic. They darted between aisles, their limbs jerking in unnatural, puppet-like movements. "We need to hide," John said, his voice barely a whisper. "There's something wrong. We can't stay out here in the open." His mother nodded, her face set in grim determination. "Come on, let's find somewhere to wait this out. A staff room, an office, anything." They moved quickly, huddled together, the darkness pressing in around them. The howls grew louder, closer, as if the creatures, whatever they were converging on their location. John's heart pounded in his chest, every nerve screaming for him to run, to find shelter. They stumbled into a section filled with kitchen displays, stainless steel appliances gleaming in the faint light. "There," John's mother pointed, her voice urgent. "That break room, It's got a door. We can lock ourselves in." They ran, Sarah tripping over her own feet in her haste. John reached the door first, yanking it open, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They piled inside, slamming the door shut behind them. John fumbled for a lock, his fingers brushing over cold metal. He turned the deadbolt, a soft click echoing in the small space. For a moment they stood in the dark, the sound of their breathing the only noise. John could feel the tension radiating from his mother, the way Sarah's small frame shook with fear. Outside, the howling reached a fever pitch, joined by a strange metallic clanking. The faceless employees moved past the door, their footsteps unnaturally loud in the silence. "What's happening?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "What are those things?" John didn't have an answer. He wished he did. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this, for faceless creatures in a store that turned into a nightmare as soon as the lights went out. The noise outside grew louder, a cacophony of snarls and metallic crashes. John felt a sudden, cold certainty settle in his gut they weren't safe. Not here. Not anywhere in this place. He turned to his mother, seeing the same realization reflected in her eyes. "We need to keep moving," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We can't stay here. They'll find us." His mother nodded, her jaw clenched. She reached out, pulling Sarah close. "Okay, but we need to find your father. We're not leaving without him." John swallowed, the thought of his father out there in the darkness almost too much to bear. But before he could say anything, a loud bang echoed through the break room, the door shuddering under a heavy impact. "John," his mother breathed, her voice tight with panic. "What was that?" John didn't have time to answer. The door shuddered again, a splintering crack spreading through the wood. Whatever was on the other side was strong, and it wanted in. John stepped back, his heart pounding. They were trapped, cornered with nowhere to go. The door burst open, and the faceless employees surged in, their blank faces turned towards them. John's mother screamed, pulling Sarah behind her. John grabbed the nearest object, a metal chair, and swung it with all his strength. The chair connected with a sickening thud, but the employee barely stumbled. They closed in, arms outstretched, movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Run," John's father's voice came from the doorway, his face flushed with exertion. He held a length of pipe, his expression fierce. "Get out of here. I'll hold them off." "Dad," John cried, his voice breaking. "Go," his father shouted, swinging the pipe. "Now." John's mother grabbed his arm, pulling him towards the back of the room. Towards a narrow door marked exit, John hesitated, his heart wrenching as he watched his father fight. But the faceless employees were relentless, their numbers growing. His father's eyes met his, a silent plea. John turned, pushing Sarah ahead of him. They burst through the exit, into the cold, dark night. The last thing John heard was his father's voice, shouting in defiance, before the door slammed shut behind them. The darkness inside Ikea felt like it had swallowed the world. John couldn't tell how long they'd been running. His breath burned in his lungs, each step a jolt of pain up his legs. Sarah's hand was clamped around his, her fingers ice cold and trembling. Their mother followed close behind, her face a mask of grim determination, the terror of the last few moments held at bay by sheer willpower. Somehow they'd found their way into a quieter part of the store, the noise of pursuit fading behind them. They stumbled into a section filled with bedroom displays, the soft glow of emergency lighting casting long shadows on the floor. John scanned the area, looking for any sign of danger, but it seemed deserted. For now. "Here," his mother said, her voice hoarse. She pointed to a narrow space between two wardrobes. "Let's catch our breath." They squeezed into the small gap, huddling together in the dim light. John's heart still pounded in his chest, the sound of it loud in his ears. Sarah clung to his side, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, trying to offer some comfort, though he felt as lost and afraid as she looked. "What were those things?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "They didn't have faces. How can they not have faces?" John didn't know how to answer. He glanced at his mother, hoping she would have something to say, some explanation that made sense. But she only shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know," she admitted. "But we need to find a way out of here. Your father," her voice broke, and she took a shaky breath. "We need to get help." They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The store seemed eerily quiet now, the earlier howls and crashes replaced by an unsettling stillness. John's mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened, how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. A rustling sound broke the silence, and they all froze. John strained his ears, trying to locate the source. It came again from the aisle just beyond their hiding place. A soft, shuffling noise like footsteps. Someone or something was nearby. John's mother put a finger to her lips, signaling them to stay quiet. They held their breath, waiting. The noise grew closer, and then a voice called out, low and hesitant. "Hello? Is someone there?" John's heart skipped a beat. The voice sounded human, normal, not like the faceless employees. He peered around the edge of the wardrobe, catching a glimpse of a figure moving cautiously through the aisles. A man, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, his face haggard and pale. He held a makeshift club, his eyes darting nervously around the store. John's mother stepped forward, her hand raised in a cautious wave. "We're here," she called softly. "Please, don't come any closer." The man stopped, his eyes narrowing as he spotted them. "You're real," he said, relief flooding his voice. "I thought I was the only one left." "We're real," John's mother confirmed. "But we don't know what's going on. Those ... things, the employees, they attacked us." The man nodded grimly, lowering his club. "Yeah, they do that. You're new, aren't you?" "Just got here." John exchanged a confused glance with his mother. "What do you mean, just got here? We came in to shop, and then everything went crazy." The man let out a dry, humorless laugh. "That's how it happens. You walk in, and then the doors close, and you can't get out. Welcome to SCP-3008, or as I like to call it, Hell on Earth." SCP-3008, John repeated, the term foreign and strange on his tongue. "What is that? Is it a code or something?" "It's ... complicated," the man said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I worked for an organization, the SCP Foundation. We deal with things like this, anomalies, places that don't follow the normal rules of reality. SCP-3008 is one of them. This store, it's not just an Ikea, it's a trap. And once you're inside, getting out isn't easy." John's mother shook her head, disbelief etched on her face. "This can't be real. We're in a store, not some ... some science fiction nightmare." The man's expression softened, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "I know it's hard to believe. I didn't believe it at first either. But I've been stuck here for months. There are others, survivors like us. We've been trying to find a way out, but it's not simple. This place, it's like a maze. And the staff. They aren't human. They're part of the anomaly. They get more aggressive at night." "Months." Sarah's voice was small, trembling. "You've been here for months." The man nodded. "Yeah, time doesn't work right here either. You lose track. But we survive. There's food, water, even a place to sleep if you're careful. But you have to be smart, stick together, and whatever you do, don't get caught by the staff." John felt a cold knot of dread settle in his stomach. This wasn't just a bad dream or a prank. It was real. They were trapped in a place that defied logic, with no way out. "What's your name?" John's mother asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Alex," the man replied. "Alex Donovan. I'll take you to the others. You'll be safe there for now." John glanced at his mother, then at Sarah. He could see the fear, the uncertainty, but also the resolve. They were in this together, and they would survive. Somehow. "Okay," John said, standing up. "Lead the way, Alex. We'll follow." The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow over the group of survivors huddled in the makeshift shelter. The shelter was a crude but functional structure, cobbled together from disassembled furniture, bedsheets, and tarps. It offered little in the way of comfort, but it was a haven, a fragile bubble of safety in a world gone mad. John sat cross-legged on the floor, his eyes fixed on Alex, who stood at the center of the group, a map spread out before him. "We need to find a way out," Alex was saying, his voice low but firm. "We can't stay here forever. Supplies are running low, and the staff—" He paused, glancing around the room. "The staff are getting more aggressive. They know we're here. It's only a matter of time before they come for us." John looked around at the other survivors, their faces a mixture of fear and exhaustion. There was Karen, a middle-aged woman, who had been one of the first to arrive in this nightmare, her eyes hollow from months of terror. Next to her sat Mark, a young man barely out of his teens, his hands shaking slightly as he listened to Alex. Emily, a hardened woman with a scar running down her cheek, stood off to the side, her arms crossed over her chest, a scowl on her face. "This isn't news, Alex," Emily said, her voice edged with impatience. "We've been talking about escape for weeks, but no one's done anything about it. What's different now?" Alex met her gaze, unflinching. "We have a plan," he said simply. "A real plan. One that might actually work." John leaned forward, curiosity and hope stirring in his chest. A plan. The word seemed like a lifeline, something solid to hold onto in the sea of uncertainty that surrounded them. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the group. Alex nodded, gesturing to the map. "This is a rough layout of the store, as best as we've been able to map it," he said, tracing a line with his finger. "We're here, in the bedroom section. The safe zone," his finger moved to a different spot near the center of the map. "This is the main atrium, the heart of SCP-3008. There's a rumor that the lights never go out there, that it's a kind of safe zone where the staff don't go. We're going to head there, and from there we'll look for a way out. There are rumors of exits, doors that sometimes appear and lead outside. We find one of those and we get out." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the group. John felt his mother's hand on his shoulder, a steadying presence in the chaos. "How do you know this will work?" she asked quietly. "What if it's just another dead end?" Alex's jaw tightened. "I don't know," he admitted. "But it's better than sitting here, waiting to die. I've been here long enough to know that doing nothing isn't an option." Emily snorted. "And what makes you think you'll make it to the atrium?" "The last group that tried didn't come back." Alex's eyes darkened, a shadow of guilt crossing his face. "They weren't prepared. We are. We have weapons, supplies. We've been studying the staff's movements. We know how to avoid them. And we'll stick together." John felt a flicker of hope. It was a long shot, a gamble, but it was something. He turned to his mother, seeing the same uncertainty in her eyes. "We have to try," he said softly. "For Dad. We can't let what happened to him be for nothing." She nodded slowly, her expression hardening with resolve. "You're right," she said. "We'll do it. We'll find a way out." Alex looked around at the group, his gaze resting on each of them in turn. "This isn't going to be easy," he said. "But if we work together, we can make it. We gather supplies tonight, and we move out first thing in the morning. Be ready." The group dispersed, each person moving to gather what little they had. John stayed where he was, staring at the map. The path to the atrium seemed long and treacherous, a maze of aisles and displays. But beyond that, beyond the fear and uncertainty, lay hope. The hope of escape, of freedom. He felt Sarah's small hand slip into his, her eyes wide and scared. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked, her voice trembling. John squeezed her hand, offering a smile he didn't quite feel. "Yeah," he said, "we will. We have to." As they prepared for the journey ahead, John felt a mix of fear and determination settle over him. They were venturing into the unknown, into a place where the rules of reality didn't apply. But they weren't alone. They had each other, and they had a plan. And sometimes that was enough. The aisles stretched out before them like a twisted labyrinth, each one filled with a forest of flat-packed furniture and sterile displays. John's footsteps echoed softly on the tiled floor, each step a reminder of the vastness of the space around them. The group moved cautiously, every creak and rustle setting their nerves on edge. The oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional hum of the air conditioning, a cold breeze that sent shivers down John's spine. "Stay close," Alex whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "The staff patrol this area. We need to be quick and quiet." John nodded, gripping the handle of the makeshift spear he carried, a broken table leg, sharpened to a point. Beside him, Sarah clutched a heavy wrench, her eyes darting nervously to every shadow. Their mother walked just behind them, her face set in grim determination, a kitchen knife held tightly in her hand. They were a small group, 7 in total. Alex led the way, his movements swift and sure, his eyes scanning the aisles for any sign of danger. Emily followed close behind, her posture tense, ready for a fight. Mark and Karen brought up the rear, their expressions a mix of fear and exhaustion. Each of them carried a weapon, their only defense against the faceless employees that roamed the store. As they moved deeper into the maze of Ikea, the displays became more surreal, each aisle a strange, curated world. One aisle was filled with brightly colored rugs, hanging from racks like tapestries. Another was a sea of potted plants, their leaves rustling softly in the artificial breeze. It was easy to forget, for a moment, the nightmare they were living in, to imagine they were just shoppers, browsing the endless options of a store. But then the lights flickered, and the illusion shattered. John's heart skipped a beat, his grip tightening on his spear. Alex raised a hand, signaling them to stop. They huddled together, every eye scanning the shadows for movement. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, her voice tight with tension. John strained his ears, and then he heard it, a soft, shuffling sound, like something dragging along the floor. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the background noise, but it was there. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, a primal fear curling in his gut. "Staff," Alex muttered, his eyes narrowing. "Everyone get down, now." They dropped to the floor, pressing themselves against the base of a display. John's heart pounded in his chest, every muscle tensed. The shuffling grew louder, closer, and then a faceless employee appeared at the end of the aisle. It moved with a strange, jerky motion, its head turning side to side as if searching. John held his breath, willing himself to be invisible. The employee passed by, its smooth, featureless face scanning the aisles. It paused, tilting its head as if listening, and continued on its way, disappearing around a corner. They stayed still for a long moment, the tension thick in the air. Finally, Alex motioned for them to rise. "Come on," he said quietly. "We need to keep moving." They stood, continuing their journey through the store. John's nerves were frayed, every sound, every shadow a potential threat. He kept close to Sarah, his eyes constantly flicking to her, making sure she was safe. The hours stretched on, the store's layout shifting and changing as they moved. It was disorienting, like walking through a dream or a nightmare. They passed through the dining section, rows of tables and chairs arranged in neat lines. The kitchenware section was next, gleaming metal utensils and pots displayed like trophies. As they entered the living room area, John's foot caught on something, and he stumbled. He looked down, his breath catching in his throat. A body lay sprawled on the floor, its face hidden in the shadows. It was one of the survivors who had left the safe zone days ago, his clothes torn, his skin pale. John's stomach churned, bile rising in his throat. "Oh God," he whispered, stepping back. It's one of us." Alex knelt beside the body, his face grim. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice flat. "There's nothing we can do for him now." John nodded numbly, his mind reeling. They were in a place where people died, where survival was a daily struggle. He felt Sarah's hand slip into his, her fingers cold and trembling. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise that he would protect her, no matter what. They moved on, the image of the dead survivor burning in John's mind. The store seemed to close in around them, the aisles stretching into infinity. The faceless employees were everywhere, patrolling the aisles, their presence a constant, oppressive weight. They took shelter in a storage room, barricading the door with a heavy shelf. The group collapsed to the floor, exhaustion etched into every face. John sat with his back against the wall, his body aching, his mind numb. Sarah curled up beside him, her eyes drooping with fatigue. "We're getting closer," Alex said, his voice breaking the silence. "The atrium isn't far now. We'll rest here for a while, then keep moving." John nodded, too tired to speak. He closed his eyes, letting the darkness wash over him. They were on a journey through hell, a journey with no guarantees, no promises of safety. But they were together, and as long as they had that, they had hope. And sometimes hope was all you needed. The light never dimmed in the atrium. It bathed the vast, open space in a sterile glow that seemed at odds with the constant darkness that permeated the rest of SCP-3008. As John and the others stepped into the area, a sense of cautious relief washed over him. The faceless employees, who had been a constant threat, were nowhere to be seen. For the first time since they'd entered this nightmare, John felt a flicker of hope. The atrium was a sprawling expanse, a large circular area surrounded by a ring of smaller rooms and displays. It had the feel of a town square, a central hub around which everything else was built. In the center, a large fountain bubbled softly, its water reflecting the light in dancing patterns on the floor. Around it, makeshift shelters had been constructed from furniture and other materials, each one a testament to the ingenuity and desperation of the people who lived here. As they approached, a few figures emerged from the shelters, their faces wary. John counted at least a dozen people, all of them wearing the same mixture of fear and determination that he'd seen in the other survivors. A tall man with a shock of white hair stepped forward, his gaze appraising as he took in the newcomers. "Welcome," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "I'm Greg. You must be the ones we heard about, the group from the south section. Alex, right?" Alex nodded, stepping forward. "That's right. We've been making our way here for a while. We heard this was a safe zone." Greg nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "It is, as safe as anywhere can be in this place. The lights never go out here, and the staff avoid the area for some reason. We've managed to hold out for a long time, longer than most." John glanced around, taking in the sight of the small community. People moved between the shelters, some carrying supplies, others tending to small fires. A few children played near the fountain, their laughter a sharp contrast to the tension in the air. It was like a small village, a fragile pocket of humanity in an otherwise hostile world. "This place is incredible," John said, unable to keep the awe out of his voice. "How did you manage to build all this?" Greg shrugged, his expression turning grim. "Necessity. People need hope, something to hold on to. We've lost a lot of good people, but those of us who are left, We're fighters. We do what we can to survive." John's mother stepped forward, a mixture of relief and determination on her face. "We're looking for a way out," she said. "We were told there might be exits, doors that lead back outside. Is that true?" Greg sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We've heard the same rumors. There's always talk of doors, of ways out. But so far, no one's found anything. We've mapped most of the store, but it changes, shifts. It's like the place is alive, playing tricks on us. But we haven't given up. We keep looking." John felt a knot of frustration tighten in his chest. He'd hoped, desperately, that they'd find something concrete, a real chance of escape. But it seemed that even in this place, the reality was more elusive, more fragile than he'd hoped. "What about supplies?" Emily asked, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "Food, water. How do you survive?" Greg gestured to the surrounding rooms. "There are stockrooms scattered throughout the store. We've raided most of them. There's food, bottled water, medical supplies. Enough to keep us going for a while. But it's a constant battle. We have to be careful, ration what we have." John's stomach growled at the mention of food, a sharp reminder of how long it had been since their last meal. Greg seemed to notice, a sympathetic look crossing his face. "Come on," he said, motioning for them to follow. "We have enough to share. You look like you could use a good meal." They followed Greg to one of the larger shelters, where a group of survivors was gathered around a makeshift table. The smell of cooked food filled the air, and John's mouth watered. They sat down, plates of food passed around, the atmosphere a strange mix of camaraderie and tension. As they ate, John listened to the conversations around him, fragments of stories, bits of information. People spoke of friends lost, of encounters with the faceless employees, of close calls and narrow escapes. It was a tapestry of survival, each thread a testament to the human will to endure. When the meal was over, Greg stood, addressing the group. "We have new friends among us," he said, his voice carrying through the atrium. "They've come a long way to be here, and they're looking for the same thing we are, a way out. I know things seem bleak, but we have to keep hoping, keep fighting. Together we're strong. Together we're strong. Together we'll find a way." The murmur of agreement rippled through the group. John felt a flicker of hope, small but real. They weren't alone. They had a chance, no matter how slim, to find a way out of this nightmare. As long as they had each other, they had something worth fighting for. Later, as John lay on a makeshift bed, Sarah curled up beside him. He stared up at the unchanging light overhead. The thought of his father filled his mind, a dull ache in his chest. He closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the community around him lull him into a restless sleep. They had found a safe zone, a place to rest. But he knew, deep down, that this was only a temporary reprieve. The real fight was still ahead, and he was ready for it. The days in the safe zone had passed in a blur of activity. The survivors busied themselves with the tasks of survival, organizing food, repairing shelters, and planning for the future. For the first time since entering SCP-3008, John felt a semblance of normalcy. He and Sarah had made friends with some of the other survivors, and his mother had taken to helping Greg with the management of the community. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. It was there in the way some of the long-term residents avoided eye contact, the way conversations would abruptly shift when certain topics came up. John noticed it in the furtive glances, the hushed whispers. There was an undercurrent of fear and uncertainty, a feeling that not everyone was on the same page. One evening, as John was helping Sarah sort through a pile of scavenged supplies, Greg approached, his face lined with worry. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, privately. John exchanged a glance with Sarah, who nodded, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Sure," John said, standing up. "What's going on?" Greg led him to a small alcove near the edge of the atrium, where they could talk without being overheard. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering to the community members bustling around the safe zone. Some of the folks here, Greg began, his voice careful, they're not too keen on the idea of leaving. They've been here a long time, longer than you or I. They've grown. Accustomed to it. Comfortable even. John frowned. Comfortable? In here? How could anyone be comfortable in a place like this? Greg sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I know it's hard to believe, but some of them have lost hope of ever getting out. They've made a life here, as strange as it sounds. They don't want to risk that by trying to find an exit. So what are you saying? John asked, a sense of unease settling in his gut. They don't want us to leave. Greg nodded grimly. Exactly. They see you and your family as a threat. They're afraid that if you keep pushing for an escape, it'll stir things up, cause trouble. There's already talk of splitting the group, of kicking you out if you don't stop. John felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. They can't just force us out. We have a right to be here, to find a way out. We're all in this together, aren't we? Greg's expression softened, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. I wish it were that simple, John, but people are scared. Fear makes them do things they wouldn't normally do. I'm trying to keep the peace, but I can't guarantee anything. John clenched his fists, frustration bubbling up inside him. They'd found safety, a place to regroup, and now it was slipping through their fingers. What do we do? He asked, his voice tight. Greg hesitated, then lowered his voice to a whisper. You need to be careful. Keep your head down, don't stir the pot. Let things settle for a bit, and keep an eye out. There are a few of us who still want to find a way out, who believe there's more than just surviving day to day. But we need to be smart about it. John nodded, his mind racing. They couldn't afford to be complacent, not now. He had to protect his family, find a way to keep them safe. Thanks for the heads up, Greg, he said. We'll be careful. Greg clapped him on the shoulder, a brief, comforting gesture. We'll get through this, John. Just remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together, one way or another. John watched as Greg walked away, a sense of foreboding settling over him. The safe zone wasn't as safe as it seemed. There were factions, divisions, people who saw them as a threat. And in a place like SCP-3008, that kind of thinking could be deadly. Later that night, as the community settled down to sleep, John lay awake, staring at the unchanging light above. He could hear the soft murmur of voices, the rustle of bodies shifting on makeshift beds. The air was thick with tension, the kind that preceded a storm. A sudden noise broke the stillness, a clatter of metal, the sound of something being knocked over. John sat up, his senses on high alert. He glanced over at Sarah, who was still asleep, her breathing even and calm. His mother was nearby, her face relaxed in sleep. But John's instincts told him something was wrong. He slipped out of bed, moving quietly towards the source of the noise. As he rounded a corner, he saw a group of people huddled together, their voices low, urgent. He recognized a few of them, long-term residents, the ones who had been here since the beginning. They were whispering, their expressions tense, their bodies coiled with nervous energy. John strained to hear, catching snippets of their conversation. Can't let them ruin everything. Too dangerous. Need to be dealt with. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. They were talking about him, about his family. He turned, moving back towards his shelter, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and anger. He had to warn the others, had to. A hand clamped over his mouth, stifling his shout. He struggled, but a strong arm wrapped around his chest, pulling him back into the shadows. Quiet, a voice hissed in his ear. It's me, Alex. Don't make a sound. John relaxed slightly, recognizing Alex's voice. The older man released him, stepping back, his face grim. I heard them too, Alex said, his voice low. They're planning something. We need to get out of here now. John nodded, his mind made up. We need to get my family. We can't stay here. It's not safe. Alex nodded. Grab what you can carry. We'll find Greg, see if he can help us. But we need to move fast. They crept back to the shelter, the sounds of the community's betrayal echoing in John's mind. They'd found a safe zone, a place to rest, but it was an illusion, a fragile facade. In SCP-3008, there was no such thing as safety. There was only survival, and survival meant trusting no one. The tension in the air was electric, each breath a thin thread stretched taut, ready to snap. John, Sarah, and their mother stood in the shadows near the edge of the safe zone, Alex beside them. They were ready, packs hastily stuffed with food, water, and makeshift weapons, every item chosen for speed and necessity. The small group of loyal survivors, 7 in all, huddled around them, eyes wide and fearful in the half-light of the atrium. Greg was there too, his face drawn with worry. He'd tried to reason with the dissenters, tried to keep the fragile peace, but it was no use. The faction that wanted to stay had grown louder, bolder. They saw John and his family as a threat, a risk they couldn't afford. And when fear took hold, rationality died. We don't have much time, Alex said, his voice low, urgent. They're organizing. If we don't leave now, we won't get another chance. John's mother nodded, her expression hard, resolute. We're ready. Let's go. They moved quickly, silently, slipping away from the safe zone like shadows. The vastness of SCP-3008 stretched out before them, the familiar maze of aisles and displays. John's heart pounded in his chest, his senses heightened, every sound a potential threat. The faceless employees were out there, prowling the aisles, and now their own people were against them. As they moved, John kept a tight grip on Sarah's hand, his mind racing. They had a map, Greg's map, of the store's layout, with a route marked to a potential exit. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. The exit was rumored to be a set of emergency doors, hidden in the farthest corner of the store, beyond the sections they had mapped. We head east, Greg said, his voice a steadying presence. Keep moving, don't stop. If we're lucky, the staff will be spread thin tonight. Lucky, Emily muttered under her breath. Right, because that's what we've had so far. John shot her a warning look, but there was no time for argument. They pushed on, the atrium fading behind them, swallowed by the darkness of the store. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, shifting shadows. John's skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, the faceless employees lurking just out of sight. They crossed into the kitchen section, the gleam of metal and glass reflecting the emergency lights. The group moved as one, silent and swift, their footsteps muffled on the tiled floor. John's thoughts were a chaotic whirl, memories of his father, the betrayal of the community, the cold, relentless reality of SCP-3008. A sudden noise broke the silence, a clatter of metal, followed by a low, guttural growl. John's heart leapt into his throat, his grip tightening on Sarah's hand. The sound came again, closer this time, a shuffling, dragging noise that set his nerves on edge. Keep moving, Alex hissed, his eyes scanning the shadows. Don't stop. But it was too late. The noise grew louder, the shuffling turning into the unmistakable sound of footsteps. A figure emerged from the darkness, a faceless employee, its movements jerky, unnatural. It turned its head toward them, as if sensing their presence. John's mother raised her knife, her expression fierce. Go, she said, her voice a harsh whisper. I'll hold them off. No, John grabbed her arm, his voice tight with panic. We stay together. More figures appeared, stepping into the light, 5, 6, a dozen faceless employees, their blank visages turning in unison. They moved forward, a slow, methodical advance, their arms outstretched, fingers twitching. "We can't fight them all," Alex said, his voice strained. "Run. Now." The group broke into a sprint, the illusion of stealth shattered. They ran through the aisles, the faceless employees in pursuit, their footsteps a relentless drumbeat. The store became a blur of colors and shapes, displays flashing past in a dizzying rush. John's breath burned in his lungs, his legs aching with each step. He could hear Sarah's ragged breathing beside him, the others close behind. They turned a corner, nearly colliding with a display of sofas. John's mother grabbed his arm, pulling him forward, her face set in determination. "There," Greg shouted, pointing ahead. "The exit." John's eyes followed his gaze, spotting the red glow of an exit sign in the distance. Hope surged in his chest, a desperate, clawing need to reach those doors, to escape the nightmare that had consumed their lives. They pushed on, the exit sign growing larger, the doors just beyond. A sudden scream pierced the air, a chilling, desperate sound. John glanced back, his heart sinking. One of the survivors, a young woman named Claire, had stumbled, her foot caught on a fallen shelf. The faceless employees were upon her, their movements quick, efficient. Her screams were cut off, the sound of tearing flesh filling the air. "Keep going," Greg shouted, his voice raw with grief. "We can't help her." John's vision blurred with tears, the reality of their situation a crushing weight. They were close, so close to escape, but the cost was unimaginable. They reached the doors, slamming into them with a force born of desperation. Alex grabbed the handle, yanking it open. "Go," he yelled. "Go, go, go." They stumbled through, the light of SCP-3008 replaced by a blinding, searing brightness. John shielded his eyes, disoriented, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. They were outside, standing in a barren, featureless expanse, the sky a pale, endless white. "No," John breathed, his voice breaking. "No, this isn't right." The others stood in stunned silence, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were still in SCP-3008, still trapped in the anomaly's grasp. The exit had led them to another part of the store, another illusion. In the distance, a crack of light appeared, a sliver of hope in the endless expanse. John's heart leapt, a desperate, fervent hope igniting in his chest. "There," he said, pointing. "Look. Daylight." The group turned, their eyes following his gesture. The crack of light grew wider, a doorway opening into the outside world. John felt a surge of adrenaline, a burning need to reach that light, to be free. They ran, their footsteps pounding on the ground, the faceless employees a distant memory. The light grew brighter, blinding, a beacon of hope that pulled them forward. John's lungs burned, his muscles screamed, but he kept going, driven by the promise of escape. They reached the doorway, the light washing over them, warm and real. John stumbled through, his heart hammering in his chest. He felt grass beneath his feet, the cool breeze of the outside world on his face. He looked back, seeing the faceless employees standing at the threshold, their blank faces watching. The door swung shut, the light fading, leaving them in the quiet, peaceful embrace of the real world. John fell to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion, relief flooding through him. They were out. They were free. The nightmare was over. But as he looked at the sealed doors, the faceless employees still watching, he knew that the scars of SCP-3008 would remain. They had escaped, but the memory of the nightmare, of the people they'd lost, would haunt them forever.